Weekly Download, a podcast about interesting games, industry news.
Brought to you by Big Games Machine.
No custard today though. Welcome back to the Weekly Download by Big Games Machine, a custard-free zone. It is your wrap-up though of the week's biggest stories in gaming. I'm your host Tom. I'm once again joined by my co-host Alex, and today we're going to be looking at a few big stories. Number one, the Slay the Spire launching this March was the biggest release on Steam during the month of March. Most sales, most revenue as well. So very successful launch for Slay the Spire 2. We've also got the news that Netflix is launching its own dedicated apps for kid games called Netflix Playground. And finally, Peak, who, no. Landfall.
Landfall. The developers of Peak. The developers of Peak.
Landfall, the co-developers even of Peak, which took the world of, well, I was going to say the world of gaming, but I guess definitely the influencers and lots of media interest in Peak. Landfall have launched their own publishing label. So that's the three big stories for the day. Alex, anything you'd like to say before we... I realised I haven't let you introduce yourself, but I was very keen to let people know what we were talking about. So is there anything
I think it's an exciting week. It's good to have it all here. I was going to say, like, this is what I sound like in case anybody
who is
joined and like at some point the voice comes in from nowhere. But yeah, no, I think it's an interesting week. A lot of, a good amount of kind of indie success. It's feeling it feels like a happy week. Let's get on with it.
It does. It does feel like a happy week. So we'll break away. We'll come back and let's have a look at Slay the Spire 2. So starting this week's episode with the news that Slay the Spire 2 was March's best-selling game on Steam. Now we've only got estimates here, but we're looking at an estimated 5.3 million units sold after its early access debut, and a estimated $108 million in revenue for the month of March. I think what's really interesting with this is that it outsold Crimson Desert with an estimated 1.9 million copies, as well as, and Alex, it is here, your weekly Resident Evil mention, Resident Evil Requiem, which looks to have shifted around 1.2 million units. Now, I think that launched at the end of February, didn't it?
Yeah, I was going to say, that's just March numbers, isn't it?
Yeah, that's just March
That's just
numbers.
Steam and just March.
Yes. So I think, that is interesting. I think Crimson Desert is the better measurement stick, I guess, for this success.
Benchmark.
But something else, which I think, if we move away from the AAA, is within just 2 weeks, if these earnings are correct, it has already surpassed Hollow Knight Silksong and Hades 2. So even within that kind of like triple I space, I feel like we've got all these spaces now. Even within those bigger, independent heavyweights, Slay the Spire 2 has done remarkably well. And as you said before we got into this first story, it does seem we've got some nice stories this week. No, this is like a really happy story. I think it's a great success for Megacrit. I've not played 2 yet, but I've spent a lot of time in Slay the Spire 1. And I think something I did mention to you before we started was that I think it's interesting that we've seen a few really big sequels to big indie games that came out 4, 5, 6, even longer in some cases, years ago.
Yeah, I think before the environment got, I mean, it was always competitive, but before it got so competitive, like I remember a point where, saying, it's a solo team or a small team was enough to, and it was polished, was enough to lead to a story in media. Whereas now, like that's
too many
everyday stuff. Yeah. So having that old groundswell kind of carry you through. And I'm not saying there aren't games that still kind of break through and make that success. I mean, Balatro is obviously the easy example, Vampire Survivor, although I think that dates back a fair way as well. We're not quite as far back as these sequels. But yeah, having that foundation set early on and the kind of growth of those titles and all the fans that have come in through Steam sales and word of mouth and all that certainly starting to pay off. And I guess, we're seeing indie franchises, and not the indie. Obviously, we've seen indie franchises, but not the ones that are like. And I think I was talking to you about this earlier today. Actually, Broken Law, this kind of series of horror games, is the developer's been making games now for 2 years. 2025 is when the first one came out, and they've got 4 games out already, all under the same kind of name. But these are kind of like these specific examples, these ones that have blown up so massively, are titles that are building off past success. They've taken their time. Obviously, the money they made off the first game has allowed them to really perfect the formula and really pour the love into it that they clearly wanted to. And it's paying off, which is fantastic.
Yeah, it is paying off. It really feels like these are examples. Of course, Slay the Spire 2 is the focus today, but I feel like we are seeing those examples of independent studios and as you said, independent franchises now being able to take advantage of the legacy that in the past has only really been there for big AAA studios purely because of the amount of time they've been there. They've been in the space and they've been able to grow those communities. And obviously we have to acknowledge the fact that these games, these indie games, are very much the peak of a mountain, which most people don't see or acknowledge 95% of that mountain. So we always have to, I think it's very easy to say, oh, well, you look at this success and you say, well, how do other people emulate it? It's really hard to do that because it doesn't happen very often. But I do think that the ability to go, we've already made Slay the Spire, we've already made Hollow Knight, we've already made, in the case of Supergiant, of course, they've got more than just Hades as well. They've got an entire catalogue of great games. But
although the Hades is their first sequel, though, like clearly, you know, the success of Hades is what drove to a Hades 2.
Yeah, that was something I was going to ask you, actually, was do you think, because all 3 of those examples we've looked at, so Slay the Spire 2, Hades 2, Hollow Knight Silksong, they are all sequels. And I think sometimes we see people might question, is the independent mindset different? Is it less a case of taking what you've already done and doing something different? But these successes are a testament to the fact that you can take the risk and go and try something else. But if the players and the fans want more of what you've already given them, there's so much potential to really springboard off of the success of an original indie game.
The name recognition is so
well
powerful. The name recognition is so powerful. Like I'm certain. I will say, Silksong, yes, it's a sequel, but I think it was something that started as an update for fans and that grew to the point where they were like,
yeah, it was a Kickstarter. That the original aim with Silksong, it was a Kickstarter extension goal. I can't think when you already pass a certain point on Kickstarter, you get the extra goals. I believe
stretch
the
goals.
idea for Silksong was, stretch goal was one of them. So it is less sequely than the other 2. Obviously, it doesn't have a big fat 2 at the end of it.
Yeah.
Not just Nintendo hopping on the 2 bandwagon. I think it's funny to me, though, because when I talk about the Switch, I don't refer to it as the Switch 2. I don't refer to it as the Switch 2. And I don't, when I've been thinking about Slay the Spire 2 recently, it's very hard to not just call it Slay the Spire. But I don't know if that actually works in the favor of studios who do things like this, because it kind of just creates this big homogenous recognition of that series. And yes, there's new entries, but it's all just Slay the Spire. It's just slightly different.
It comes down to, somebody asked me the other day, and it cuts both ways, right? Like, I was wearing a Resident Evil hat, and somebody said to me, "Have you played 9?"
Of course.
And I was like, it took me a second to remember what I was wearing, but it was very much this kind of like, just needed to know that context. And the flip side is, like, if you said to somebody at the moment you played Slay the Spire, they're probably going to assume you mean the new one, because it does now have that recognition. You raise an interesting point that I think is worth kind of touching on. Obviously, you've got like there are a handful of people that I think are likely of a scale where they can pivot and put out an entirely new IP in their kind of from them, and it gets a level of that name recognition. But the sequelization of the series obviously carries with it so much more, because anybody outside of, the hardcore fans are going to likely not recognize a specific developer or something. I mean, but Stardew, the Undertale games like those, like yes, they either have made or are making sequels and not sequels, follow-up games, but were they direct sequels, I bet they'd have more impact out the gate like this. So it avoids that kind of slow build and word of mouth that they have to do a second time.
Yeah, no, it's true. I think that's why it makes complete sense. I think especially with something like Slay the Spire, it's something else that I wrote down as a potential question, but as a deck builder, I think that's a niche that's hard to be good at. So it kind of makes sense that they took what they were good at and did it again, but did it better. Although it does make me ask, if we're seeing such levels of success, I feel like deck building has not necessarily been like a really closed niche in the past, but it feels like it's been not one of the... It feels like in the last couple of years, and now we've had Slay the Spire 2 to kind of confirm it, it feels like it's become a really big genre, especially on Steam. And I don't know if that's come from nowhere necessarily, but it really feels like now it's a big player within a few other massive genres, and I don't feel like it was that in the past.
I think it's always been around. I think it's an easy. I think the beauty of a deck builder is that you can have a huge amount of depth without, and the barrier to entry isn't Twitch reflexes. So I think it opens it up to a broader audience that maybe don't have the same ability to. There's a word, accessibility. It's more accessible to people because of that timing, because you can control the whole thing with a mouse, but it doesn't remove any of the tactics, the thinking, all those other things that make games fantastic.
It's very relaxing. I've always thought, having played the first one, it's a very... I think it's a very relaxing genre, and I think it's something where you can kind of dip in and dip out, and we know how important that is nowadays as well. But yeah, I think to just come full circle on this, I think it's obviously been a tremendous success. I think it's deserved. I think, as we have said, it's hard to look and be like, oh, well, indie games are amazing. Like, any game can do this. Like, oh, anyone could be Resident Evil or Crimson Desert. In theory, yes. Obviously, there's a lot more to it than that, but I think it's always good, with the backdrop of what we've seen from the industry. I think it's really nice to see that an independent IP topping sales charts is creating tons of buzz, and yeah, it'll be interesting to see where they go next. I think they've gone for early access again. It's very much a case of listening to the community. I know from being on Reddit and Blue Sky, there's been a lot of hubbub about a few changes they made, and then they reverted them, and it seems like the players have got a very active voice in building the game, which is nice.
Yeah, and they've made enough money that they can take that time to listen and really refine it. We've seen...
They'll just stop updating it now. They'll be like, thanks, everyone.
Well, yeah.
See you later.
You see games that rock around and they're not getting that. And obviously those are the games that likely need the most help in terms of tweaking and refining the game, but you can't keep making something indefinitely if the initial support isn't there, sadly. So yeah, it's great to see that, out the gate, it's got that support, and it will no doubt continue to get better. Now the question is, how closely are they going to mirror AAA studios, and when are they going to start letting people go?
It's a good question. I didn't expect such bite from you there, but fair enough. Right, with Alex's comment, we'll move on, and we'll come back and let's talk about Netflix Playground. And we are back with our second story of the day, which is Netflix, who is launching a dedicated app for kids games called Netflix Playground. It is designed for children aged 8 and under. It's currently live in, let me make sure I've got my document right. We've got the US, the UK, Canada, Australia, the Philippines, and New Zealand. Full global rollout set for later in the month on the 28th. The current library of exclusive games at the moment is very much based on big IP. We've got Peppa Pig, Sesame Street, shout out Sesame Street, love Sesame Street, Dr. Seuss's Horton, who I'm not familiar with, and Bad Dinosaurs. So very much...
Dr. Seuss,
Yeah, I'm aware of
Yeah.
Dr. Seuss.
You just don't know who
I think,
the Horton bit is.
to make this slightly less wholesome, I think not a very nice man, Dr. Seuss, I don't believe, but I'm sure his games are good fun for the
Or his
kids
books.
to play.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, and his books. But interesting, I think, to me, no ads, no in-app purchases, no additional fees. All you need is the Netflix subscription. We've seen recently Netflix has been very turbulent with its games focus, what it does or doesn't want to do. Its latest idea is having these pillars of different types of games, one of which is kids, and that's more focused on engagement, not revenue. And I think my question is the fact that they're not looking at revenue, that there's not going to be these predatory practices within these games, that it kind of feels to me like Netflix is saying, hey, hey parents, we're a safe place for your kids to come and play games, to interact with IP that they love, especially when we compare it to perhaps other examples and platforms that time and time again are facing issues around child safety and child protection and age verification. So it seems like Netflix is really just doubling down on this idea of being a good place for kids to play games, essentially.
I assume this exists within the kids profile setting on Netflix. So, you let them in there and they have access to these games as well as the shows that are in there.
Yeah, I believe so.
And I don't know if within a kids profile you never get ads, because obviously there are the ad supported levels of Netflix now, and I don't know if across the board those aren't on kids shows or not. Not having children, I haven't had that much exposure to it, but it seems to make a lot of sense. Obviously, parents don't want ads to be out there and kind of driving everything else. I mean, admittedly, with Netflix, it's probably only going to be promoting other things that are free on the platform rather than new things to buy and help continue engagement.
I've just, not to interrupt Alex, I've just had a look on Netflix on their help page, and yeah, no ads. Ads are not currently shown on kids' profiles, so I imagine that does mean.
So this is continuing this across into, and I mean, that makes perfect sense. And I think it's fantastic. I mean, I was a big advocate, and I appreciate it's been kind of all over the place since launch, and not everything in there is fantastic, but some of the games that Netflix pulled in, Immortal, Oxenfree 1 and 2. I'm trying to remember the name of the amazing grid-based battler, Into the Breach.
Yeah,
a lot of the games,
lot
of games that they put on there are absolutely fantastic. And the idea that that's continuing through into, I might even call it more than a kids, like a proper junior offering, because obviously a lot of those games are appropriate for kids as well, but not younger kids. I think it's fantastic.
I agree.
They're free.
I agree. I think, if I understand it to be correct, which is that these games are being made exclusively for this platform as well, it opens up the opportunity to give young kids who might not have played games so far, the opportunity to play games that don't have, I think we know what mobile games are like. We know what that scene's like. Inevitably, they are all, to an extent, focused on revenue, on driving players to interact with stores and these other monetization systems. The fact that, as it stands, none of those things are a concern in this system means that people can make games that are genuinely engaging for kids and that have gameplay loops that, hopefully will then eventually they can go and play other things and not be exposed to those practices, which, again, they're needed because that's how these games fund themselves, but it's not great to put kids in those positions. So I think this is brilliant. I think the fact that you only need a Netflix subscription to access it, there's nothing else going on, is great. I think for Netflix it's good because they can if they can get kids engaging with this system, then it's a reason why the parents are going to cancel the subscriptions, which is the win for everyone. And I think it's good to just have more competition. I think if Netflix finally...
Yeah, it's a differentiator for them as well, because obviously, there are so many streaming services now, and I know most of the parents I know swear by Disney because they've got Bluey on it. and that seems to be a big draw for everyone. But
Everyone
if a
loves
kid
Bluey.
picks this up and suddenly they're like massively into the Sesame Street game, like you're going to keep paying that subscription each month, and you can settle on the cheapest subscription as well. It's not forcing you to buy the higher ones because the ads aren't there. So yeah, I'm really
You've
happy to
mentioned
see
that,
them.
and I think that's really interesting because Lisa Burgess, who is Netflix Games' GM for the kids side of things, one of the things she raised when talking about this was that if kids play something, they'll watch it. If they watch it, they'll play it. So I guess in the future, Netflix can look to leverage their own IP, their own original productions, make games of them, and then eventually, if you're interacting with this, you think it's what we're seeing. We're seeing Nintendo do this in reverse, where they make all these games, and now they're starting to turn them into films and TV shows. Well, Netflix is kind of doing that backwards.
Well, they've already made the
And I think
Stranger
it's-
Thing games, right? There's been 3 of those, I think, all on there, and yeah. And I think they've got a Love is Blind game on there. Love is Blind stands.
I think they've got games for. Well, it is. I think there's a wider conversation to have at some point, and I'm sure we will, because Netflix make their moves in games quite a lot. But Netflix have been all over the place with this strategy with games. But this feels to me like one of the best steps they've taken, because it is an opportunity to carve a niche out, and as we've said, be a safe place for kids to come and play. And it feels like everything else they've tried has been a bit directionless. Whereas
it feels the most. I was
really
going to say
like.
it feels the most. It feels the most coherent with the rest of their strategy.
Yeah.
For a long time, I was like, yeah, if you've got Netflix, hop on the game section. There might be something in there for you. They've got some amazing things, but you're trying to get parents or other people in that are like, okay, they're never really going to engage. Whereas for kids, it works perfectly. Like you say, it's symbiotic. It feeds the shows, feed the games, and the games feed the shows. I mean, what would be a real curveball would there be for them to now go and get a Bluey game, put that in there, and kind of like pull all these people across that are on Disney and force them to be on both because they're playing
their
both
games,
the Disney show. Yeah, so you end up in this weird, like, okay, now we need Disney and Netflix because we want the Bluey game while they watch Bluey. I'm just using Bluey as an example, and I feel like I've said it so many times now that it means nothing to anybody.
Is it even a word?
That is the, like, where you could play into that a bit more over time and kind of
there's a lot of potential here, and I think it's really good that from the top they are very aware of the fact that, and again, not to bring up Nintendo, but Nintendo have done so much work to become, again, the kind of, we're fighting against Roblox, we're fighting against these other like UGC things, but we want to be the place where your kids start to play games. We want to kind of take over and not in a nefarious way, but brainwash them into loving our games. A very, very, very polite brainwash, but it's just Mario everywhere. But it feels like that kind of thing. And this is only the start. I mean, it'll be interesting to see, like we've said, are they going to bring in their own IP? What other deals are they going to strike to try and bring these games in? I do like the fact that, by all accounts, they're making games that don't have any of those more, not to keep saying nefarious, but those elements in. I think it's really nice that they're just, it reminds me as a kid of playing, I don't know if you've ever, the Leapfrog books where you like put the cartridge in and then you have to don't know if that, anyone listening, if anyone here grew up with Leapfrog books, it's a similar kind of thing. You put the cartridge in, then you play along with the book while you're reading it. So I'm very much a fan of these kids are kids, let's make things specifically for them approach. And then they can go and play other games when they get a bit older. But I think on that note, again, very wholesome story. We'll break away, and then we'll come back and look at this last big story about Landfall and their new publishing label. And our final major story of today's episode is the news that Peak co-developer Landfall has launched a publishing label called, well, aptly named Evil Landfall. I don't know if they are evil, but that's the name they've gone for. Landfall, Evil Landfall even, will operate as a funding and publishing label. The label has kind of existed for around 3 years now, but they're really going public now. They're very much promoting their existence and they're actively looking for projects. Investments will be up to $1 million. They're looking at a few games every year. And I think what makes total sense is that they're committed to targeting games that have got, it's either silly stuff, physics-based stuff, which is what we've seen something like Peak be. High social interaction games, again, very Peak-esque. Short development cycles and strong virality. So it feels like they've kind of gone, this has worked for us, so let's try and find other people who are doing the same thing and give them a leg up. In essence, that's what this feels like to me. I think one of the interesting aspects of this story is that we're now seeing a few bigger independent studios start to expand their capacity and start publishing and financing. I think Outer Sloth is probably the biggest example of this, whereas in the past we had those bigger independent publishers like Devolver.
Yeah.
Now, more and more, we're seeing smaller studios step up and we'll see how successful they are, but kind of go, well, maybe we can try this. You know, if we put a bit of money here, we can offer some expertise. So, yeah, that's the context, Alex. Do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, you bring, especially indies like this, we're going to bring with them their own kind of massive community and infrastructure. Like if you, especially for the way Evil Landfall's kind of looking, if they're looking to bring in kind of games similar to Peak, there's nothing to stop them tipping it, getting into their own socials, obviously getting into the Discord and really accelerating that awareness. I mean, it's one of those funny things with a Kickstarter is a strange example and kind of a dated one at this point. But, once you've run one Kickstarter that's been successful, you have access to that entire mailing list to reutilize that for your next project and your next project and your next project. And things grow from there. So, we were talking previously about people tapping into their sequels. Similarly, people like within their own label, if that's got enough recognition and how that works. But this is using exactly that same thing, but not making it yourself, like finding games that you believe in that you can build from there. So I think, assuming that their scouts and the people looking at the games kind of know exactly what they're looking for and have a good deal of experience, and I'm sure they do. I think this could be a really good way forward, especially with the brief they've got. I mean, I know sorry, still going, but I know there are a lot of publishers out there that kind of look, they kind of look purely at kind of those procedure-based, like forever games, like just continually building factories, and that's kind of like their niche. And same with Frontier. Am I thinking Frontier?
Yeah.
No, Paradox.
Well,
sorry, I'm thinking Paradox. Where it's like all strategy games all the time, and it just allows you to feed your own ecosystem and kind of grow from there.
I was going to mention, because I know, I'm glad you brought that point up, because I was going to mention, I know we covered it a few weeks ago, so I was just going back through our episode scripts, and you think a few weeks ago we had the Fun Pimps being acquired by Behaviour Interactive. So Fun Pimps, developers of 7 Days to Die, Behaviour Interactive, Dead by Daylight. In that case, that was an acquisition. But it does feel like we are seeing a lot of traditionally not big studios and publishers and groups of developers kind of have these moments of thinking, hey, like we're actually quite good at this, we think we can help other people. Let's use the success we've had and help. And obviously everyone's making money out of this, so it's not like anyone's doing it out of the good of their heart, but it feels like we are seeing this revolution of sorts where a lot of these studios are saying, okay, we can help with these kind of things. We know, as you've made the point, we've got the communities who like these kind of games. Mm-hmm. We know how to engage with those kind of people, so we can step in and help other people. And I think $1 million is a lot of money, but in the context of funding video games, it's quite a small amount to go out and be like, hey, we can, if it's good enough, we'll give you this money. Of note, Evil Landfall don't have any interest in IP rights. So that's something that would remain entirely with the studios who they're helping, which again, that's a win for the studios involved.
Absolutely.
And I think what interested me was the fact that Repo, which was one of the biggest indies of last year, was partially funded by Evil Landfall when they were being all sneaky and not telling anyone about their plans to come and do this kind of stuff. So they've already got a bit of success in this, which I think is only going to help them. Now they can, if anyone comes to them and asks what they can do to help, they can point to what they've made themselves, but they can also point to a few of these other examples of projects that they've helped bring to fruition.
Absolutely. I mean, we see people tap into their communities all the time, but I think if you're sticking with a very refined type of game that, the audience all feeds itself, it makes sense. And I think it's coming out of necessity. Like, it's been so hard to get funding these last few years. And we talk time and again about how indies are taking up so much of total sales, but that's dominated by a handful of games, like even more
Slay the Spire 2, for example.
Slay the Spire 2, exactly. But if studios like that are like, okay, we're going to reinvest this into the community that brought us up, and we're going to and work with that, it's going to give, I suppose at that point they're not indies, but it's going to give more power to these smaller studios that are coming up and
well, that's a whole
other
nother question though, isn't it?
What's an indie?
The classic. Yeah, the classic. Technically, Epic Games is an independent company, so they are an indie studio. But yeah, I think very, very nice, very wholesome, really nice to see. I think definitely something, if you're listening, keep looking for this stuff because it's happening more and more. I think we're only going to see more cases where the bigger, small studios are doing this. And I think that the ones we've seen do it so far seem to be having quite a lot of success from it. So it'll be interesting. Are we going to be in a position where in 5 years' time, we've still got the big ones on top, but there's a lot of smaller publishing houses and such below them potentially?
I suspect
Evil Landfall could be one of them.
I suspect so. I don't think Evil Landfall or a lot of these smaller people with eyes to publishing are looking at getting to the scale of like an Assassin's Creed or pick another. I don't know why Assassin's Creed is the one that sprang to mind.
That's
but
the one.
just the scale
not
involved.
Resident Evil, Assassin's Creed.
Like, I don't think they have aspirations to go that high. They're far more focused on creating small, distilled, process-led games. Whereas,
I think we've seen the result of overextension and other such things. So yeah, good luck to Evil Landfall. We'll break away now, and when we come back, we'll look at a few smaller sprinkles of stories from the week. No Mario deep dive again like we did last week. And welcome to this week's Rapid Rundown. Not welcome back. A few stories to look at today, the first of which is about Hideo Kojima. I feel like every time Kojima comes out with something, it's always worth talking about, but this story popping up this week that essentially Low Raw, who is one of the musicians in the Death Stranding games, among others, the reason for their inclusion was because Hideo Kojima is a bit worried that the players of Death Stranding, they're not getting enough culture in their lives. So he was very keen to curate the music in a way that people could get exposure to some songs and musicians that he loves. I think if your opinion might be different, Alex, I know you'll be aware I do like the Death Stranding games and I am a fan of Kojima. I feel like if anyone else said this, people would be a bit insulted by it, but it feels like Kojima can kind of just say these things and just be like, look, I know what I'm doing. You guys don't. So here you go. And people are like, oh, thank you. That's
thank
just
you.
What
Please feed me more. I mean, I don't think there's any. I think it's a very strange way of putting it, and also you've got to wonder. Like, I imagine the interview was in Japanese. He tends to give most of his interviews in Japanese translated, even though I understand his English is very good. So I wonder, like, where like a bit of culture comes from, like allow people to experience things they haven't from other countries. Like Low Roar is not, they're Icelandic, right? So it's not. I can imagine the tone of something from Iceland fitting the desolation of, not that Iceland is desolate, but it is quite barren.
Yeah, I mean, it is very. I think you could compare it to Iceland. I think you're right, though. I mean, we've got this quote from Kojima, which
I don't know.
It's from Vogue Japan, so it will have been translated. I think, of course, it's worth noting that Japanese has a lot of context that can be lost because of how the language works, I believe. Not that I'm an expert. But yeah, one of the things which Kojima says was, when someone hears a song in the game and feels, oh, I like this, I want that spark to lead them to discover the band, to explore Icelandic music more deeply, or even to seek out related films. So yeah, very much very wholesome, I think. And
I barely played Death Stranding. I played it a little bit, but when I did, do you recall if when a new song comes on, it puts the artist and like, because that was something that Metal Gear Solid 5 did. You'd have not only the name of the artist, but also the recording and everything else.
I don't want to get torn apart now by the experts. I know in the second one, I think it's in the first one, but in the second one, you have like a music player. So you can go into it and make your own playlists of all the in-game songs. And then I think it does pop up. So it is, yeah, very, very true to what Kojima said. I think it's about opening up things to people. And I'll be honest, there's a lot of music from Death Stranding. Low Roar's one of them. Geese is another. There's a few artists that I'd not heard of that I heard in Death Stranding and now listen to. So,
there you
go. The guy's got a point. The guy's got a point.
No, I mean, being exposed to, cultural influences outside of your own is always great. You always find new things. It feels a little weird. It feels like a strange way of putting it. But again, I wonder how much of that is just not lost in translation, but kind of a hiccup in translation. It's like, oh, I'd like people to experience things I like and maybe broaden what they listen to. I think somehow that
maybe he's just so arrogant. He's like, I have amazing taste, you guys don't.
Culture,
so.
adding it's just the culture word just feels a bit loaded, and I wonder if that's just how much of that's a literal translation without the loaded.
It could be true. Although I feel like if you're playing Death Stranding, I feel like the average Death Stranding player will have more exposure to culture than players of other games. And now I'm sounding really pretentious, and that's definitely not my intention. But having played the Death Stranding games, they're not normal games. They're not for people who want to like switch off and shoot stuff. They're very boring at times. So the music livens things up. Anyway, aware of the hole I might be digging myself into, the other little story we wanted to look at today was this new initiative from PlayStation dubbed the Player Base. I'm doing little bunny ears for anyone listening. The Player Base, which sounds very cool, very epic. Essentially, select participants who join this program will be scanned into Gran Turismo 7 and exist within there, I believe, as a limited time character portrait within the game. I imagine this might extend to other games. I don't really see the point of this, but
that's
just my opinion. We are talking. Well, we're talking about it because I think it's interesting. I just don't really see the point, but it feels. I don't know. Is this like an immersion thing? Are we going to end up in a situation where when you play an RPG with a character creator, you can just like scan a photo of yourself and it'll make you?
I mean, that's been a thing for a while. I mean, they added that into sports games. I can't remember if it's been in this generation or during the last one.
I feel like they were. I remember it being a thing in FIFA, but it was
and not great.
Not great.
Sure. But
not great.
I think the bigger point of this isn't that you can be in the game. It's that they're essentially finding the biggest fans to be in the game, and that's the real hunt. It's getting people to share their love of PlayStation Online, which feels like that's the reason.
What do you think?
Is it a bit of fun?
Is it going to be weighed on how much money you've spent in the PlayStation Store? Do you reckon
that's behind the scenes. They're not a real fan. They haven't even bought.
We need to make a little reference back to another episode. We need the list of all the people who we screwed over the most with those selective discounts we're doing now. So the ones who have got the smallest discounts, they buy the most stuff. So let's ferry them over and shove them into a photography booth, and we'll get them in the game.
I think it's cute. I do think it's cute. I mean, I think especially it's kind of a shame because I feel like anybody that does there'll be a handful of people that'll obviously be excited at the kind of adult end. But I feel like this is something that I can imagine a kid seeing themselves in a game being absolutely made up. I just feel like we're targeting the wrong people.
But then I imagine it won't be for under 18s, will it? So it'll,
no.
I think it is
your own copy of the game. To be clear, not.
Yeah. No, I know I said I don't really see the point. I do think it's cool. I played one of the NASCAR games a few years ago, not to go on a tangent, but one of the things I thought was cool in that was that alongside all the actual drivers that you could play as, you could pick all the esports players as well. Like you could drive as them, which I thought, I know that's not super similar to this, but I think it's that. Yeah, if you get the opportunity to like be in a game that you love in any way, it's cool. And the fact that they've said, oh yeah, this is just like a start, more things will come. It'll be interesting to see what other stuff they do. I feel like this would be a great thing to do if you're like launching something and PlayStation are like, right, this game's coming out in a few months. 100 people are going to be scanned into the game in whatever way. That's like my marketing brain is like, that would be a really cool idea. But yeah, a little bit strange.
Then the game ends up being awful, and you're forever in there.
Yeah, and then you're stuck in there.
You're distorted more.
I'm pledging a lawsuit against Sony because I don't want to be in this rubbish game anymore. Please
take me out.
But no, I mean that's the episode really. I think this has been, as you said, Alex, this has been a really optimistic episode. I think some really nice.
I think possibly the most optimistic episode we've had, apart from my little sting of how many people.
Yeah, apart from your little one at the start, it's been very nice. It's been nice to be smiling, and not that I'm miserable. I think we always smile when we record these, but it's really nice to have some good stories. And of course, people are wondering, where can I get more of these stories? I can't guarantee they'll always be this happy and joyful. No. But the good news is we do have lots of other resources so you can access more of these stories. We've got the weekly download, which goes live on LinkedIn every Friday. And we also have the daily download, which is 5 days a week. To look at the biggest stories of the day, notable news. We also have a updated events calendar so you can see what events are coming up. So, you can always get access to more of these stories. And that's pretty much it, really. You'll find the link for the daily download in the description below. Other than that, thank you so much for watching, for listening. Be sure to subscribe if you've enjoyed it and you want to see us again next week. And that's all from me. Thank you so much for tuning in. Goodbye.